Staple is a term for cards that are good in just about any deck. So in this list, we'll be going over the best staples that are of the highest rarity in Duel Links. And at number 10, we have Floodgate Trap Hole. This is a trap card which has the effect where when your opponent summons a monster, or any number of monsters at the same time, you get to change those monsters to face down defense position where they're permanently stuck there, unless you use some kind of effect to flip them back up. Now, as soon as Pendulums got announced, a Floodgate Trap Hole was put on the Limit 3 list because it can completely stop a whole board of Pendulum summoned monsters. However, the card was already heavily played even before then, because Floodgate Trap Hole is able to flip a monster face down permanently, which means that monster can't be used for Synchro or Xyz plays. It basically stops a monster dead in its tracks, without sending it to the graveyard, and kind of just taking up one of your opponent's monster card zones. The only way they can get rid of the card is if they tribute the monster face down with some kind of effect, or tribute summon, or if they use a monster as a fusion material, because fusions are the only extra deck monster that allows you to use face down monsters as materials. Although one of the great things about Floodgate Trap Hole, the reason it continues to see heavy competitive usage in all kinds of decks, even though the card is not as versatile as cards like Paleozoic or Karma Cut, because the card does require a specific trigger to use and can be destroyed by your opponent just blindly MSTing in the back row. No, the reason Floodgate Trap Hole is more used than cards like Paleozoic is because the card does not target, and of course, doesn't allow the card to be flipped up afterwards. If your opponent summons a boss monster like Evil Hero Dark Gaia through Dark Fusion, which means it can't be targeted by card effects for the turn, you can still put the card face down and then get rid of it at your leisure. Same with other untargetable boss monsters like Lunalight Saber Dancer. It also allows you to flip down hard to destroy cards like Bloom Diva the Melodious Choir, so that you can just get rid of it with some other kind of card effect, because Bloom Diva is not immune to card effects destructions while it's face down. Or you can just get rid of it with something else, like Digital Bug Corbage, which sees tons of play in the metagame probably because of cards like Floodgate Trap Hole and a lot of the other cards that'll be on this list that are just seeing heavy competitive play as well. But for Floodgate Trap Hole's way of completely stopping pretty much any boss monster that's summoned, and completely shutting down a pendulum summon, it's no wonder it's one of the most played ultra rare trap staples in the game, even if it does lose out to Treacherous Trap Hole and one other trap card that will be in this list in total usage, because Treacherous Trap Hole is kind of broken in Duel Links. And at number 9, we have Archfiend Eccentric. This is a level 3 pendulum monster which has the pendulum effect that allows you to destroy itself and one other card in the spell and trap card zone, which basically allows you to use Archfiend Eccentric from your hand as spot spell and trap card removal. Or you can summon it as a monster and use its monster effect where it can tribute itself in order to destroy one monster on the field. And if you happen to be playing a pendulum deck, its scales are actually not half bad at 7. And being a level 3 monster means you can bring it out and use its monster effect to destroy one of your opponent's monsters, which can give extra benefits to your pendulum summon if you bring it out from the extra deck. However, the most usage that Archfiend Eccentric sees in competitive Duel Links is mainly in Gaia the Magical Knight of Dragon decks, because Gaia decks really love back row removal. That way they can hit other back row removal cards before they can activate their field spell card, which is a +1 generating machine that locks down card effects during the battle phase. However, the skill that most Gaia decks use to get their field spell card out requires you to specifically return a monster from your hand to the deck in order to activate the field spell card from your deck. And since Archfiend Eccentric is both a back row removal card that does not require your normal summon to use and is technically a monster, it kind of fits perfect with the deck as an option to return to the deck to activate the skill. In addition, it's just good in pretty much any deck, because it's basically generic back row removal card that can sometimes be used to normal summon itself in order to use its tribute effect to destroy a monster. So it does see play in other competitive decks as well, but it definitely sees the most amount of play in Gaia decks. And at number 8, we have Brionac, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. This is a generic level 6 synchro monster which has the effect where you can discard any number of cards from your hand to the graveyard in order to target the same number of cards your opponent controls and return those cards to your opponent's hand. Now, Brionac was actually a meta card in the TCG and was even banned for a really long time because it used to not have a once per turn on its effect, which is kind of crazy because the effect is still good even with a hard once per turn, and only being able to target your opponent's cards, as it also used to allow you to target any cards in the field and not just your opponent's. And of course in Duel Links, Brionac is also pretty good and sees competitive play in pretty much any deck going into level 6 synchro monsters. The main reason for that is that if you're able to go into Brionac, and you know you're able to get out an amount of damage in order to win, you can just kind of discard your entire hand to remove your opponent's back row in order to guarantee a victory, in addition to maybe one of their monsters in the field as well. Or you can just get rid of your entire hand to bounce all of your opponent's monsters, since sending cards back to the hand is better than destroying them in most cases. And there's a popular meta deck that revolves around Deep Sea Diva and a skill which locks you out of using anything but water monsters in your extra deck. And since Brionac is one of the best level 6 synchro monsters anyway, this isn't that much of a detriment to that deck. And even in dinosaur decks, which have access to level 6 synchro monsters thanks to Raiden and the Paleozoics, they opt to use Brionac in most cases because it's just great at ditching their entire hand to the graveyard, where they want most of their cards anyway, while also having an excellent removal effect. And at number 7, we have Sphere Kuriboh. This is a hand trap which can be activated when your opponent's monster declares an attack, where you can change that monster to defense position. In addition, it has a niche graveyard effect to be used as a material for a ritual summon, but that's not why the card sees so much competitive play as a staple. Out of all of the commonly played hand traps that are meant to stop attacks from the hand, Sphere Kuriboh was the only one which can allow you to protect your monsters. All the other ones just prevent battle damage or can only be used when you're taking a direct attack. Which is why Sphere Kuriboh has continued to see widespread competitive play ever since it first came out in one of the original first sets in Duel Links. It's kind of one of the longest lived staple ultra rare rarity cards in the game, and it's surprising that its ability to just change one monster to defense position has continued to be relevant throughout the years. I think what really helps Sphere Kuriboh continue to see play is the fact that it's a dark attribute monster, so it combos really well with any kind of chaos deck, and also because of just how defense position oriented the game is, where one of the most played extra deck monsters is Digital Bug Korbosh, which allows you to spin a defense position monster back to your opponent's deck. So Sphere Kuriboh can both protect one monster from an attack, or protect you to not lose that turn. Then you might be able to spin an indestructible boss monster with Korbosh on your next turn. Or if it's just a high attack, low defense monster like Evil Hero Dark Gaia. Especially since Sphere Kuriboh doesn't target. And one other advantage Sphere Kuriboh has over some of the other hand traps is that it can completely stop monsters who attack multiple times, like Chimera Tech Rampage Dragon, who can usually easily plow through one or two hand traps, who loses to a single Sphere Kuriboh, where it's then incredibly vulnerable with only 1600 defense. And one of the big advantages that hand traps have over spell and trap cards that stop in attacks, even though we have cards like Drowning Mirror Force which can stop attacks to a much better effect, is just how safe they are in your hand in comparison to spell and traps. It's almost impossible for standard cards to hit a card in your opponent's hand, whereas nearly everyone plays spell and trap card removal, or has plays which naturally destroy spell or traps, but the hand is relatively safe. And at number 6, we have C39 Utopia Ray. This is a monster that can simply be ranked on top of number 39 Utopia, and is usually played as just an option in a lot of people's extra decks because of a couple of reasons. First off, let's go over its effect. Its first effect is just its summoning procedure, where you can just put it up on top of a number 39 Utopia you control. And then its other effect can be used only if you have 1000 or less life points, where you can detach one of its materials in order for it to gain 500 attack until the end of the turn, and then you can make one of your opponent's monsters lose 1000 attack as well. And what's really good about this card is the fact that it's not once per turn, nor does it target. So you can use the effect 3 times total if you rank it up on top of Utopia that has all of its materials, which means it can make itself gain 1500 attack and have your opponent's monsters lose 3000 attack, which actually gives Utopia Ray 4000 attack. And being able to lower one of your opponent's monsters' attack by 3000 basically means you'll be attacking into a 0 attack monster, which is an instant win. And with the starting life point value in Duel Links only being 4000, plus lots of decks manipulating their life points intentionally to activate skills, going into Utopia Ray could kind of just win you the game on its own. Or just completely turn a game around if you're going against an untargetable boss monster like Lunalight Saber Dancer, which is why it and the card needed to bring it out are some of the most played rank 4 extra deck monsters, because it is literally a generic 4 win condition if you're under 1000 life points. And at number 5, we have Cosmic Cyclone. This is a quick play spell card which simply has the effect where you need to pay 1000 life points in order to banish one spell or trap card on the field. Normally, spell and trap cards don't have floating effects. In fact, it's pretty rare for them to have one. So banishing a spell or trap card is not a huge benefit over just destroying one of them. So the reason Cosmic Cyclone sees a ton of competitive play is precisely because it has a useful effect attached to paying 1000 life points. You see, there's lots of skills in the game that require you to lose 1000 life points in order to activate them. And being able to pop one of your opponent's back row cards with a good effect that you can activate from your hand immediately, like Archfiend Eccentric from earlier, is just really good. And being able to do this with a quick play spell card is even better, because that means you can use it immediately from your hand on your turn to blindly plot back row cards before you start your plays, or you can set the card in order to use it during your opponent's turn. And one of the best ways to use it during your opponent's turn is during your opponent's end phase, in order to destroy one of the back row cards before they have a chance to chain it in response. And while spell and trap floating effects are not very common, they aren't completely non-existent either. In fact, one of the best competitive meta decks, as of making this video, runs a field spell card that has a good floating effect called Clock Tower Prison. So being able to banish it with Cosmic Cyclone allows you to completely avoid its effect. Although since Cosmic Cyclone has a really good effect, and allows you to manipulate your life points, it's currently limited to 3 copies just like Floodgate Trap Hole, and sees heavy competitive play. Even if the most played quick play spell card pretty much has the same effect, just without a life point cost or banish as its form of removal. And at number 4, we have Breakthrough Skill. This is a trap card which allows you to negate the effects of one face-up monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn. And since Duel Links is a very monster effect heavy game, being able to negate the effects of one monster for a turn with a costless card like Breakthrough Skill is valuable against pretty much every meta deck. And in fact, it's kind of hard to find a deck where Breakthrough Skill would not be useful against it. The only thing it has going against it is the fact that it's a trap card which needs to be set first, whereas cards like Forbidden Chalice can be used immediately during your first turn. However, an advantage Breakthrough Skill has over Forbidden Chalice is the fact that it also has a graveyard effect, where during your turn, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish it from the graveyard in order to negate the effects of one face-up monster your opponent controls until the end of the turn. So it basically gets to use its effect again, but the important distinction is that it's only usable during your turn. Normally, one of the best ways to use a card which negates your opponent's monster's effects is during your opponent's turn in order to disrupt their plays. However, Breakthrough Skill having the graveyard effect has the same benefits as Forbidden Chalice of being usable during your turn, and being usable from the graveyard if it's milled through the plethora of competitive decks that like to mill cards. And there's lots of really good boss monsters that have disruption effects that you definitely want to negate during your turn before you start your plays. So it's an excellent card to use against an enemy Gaia the Magical Knight of Dragons, a Cyber/Harpy Lady, or a Bloom Diva the Melodious Choir so you can attack over it. Breakthrough Skill is mainly used in decks that like to mill cards from their deck to the graveyard, but it's definitely also useful in non-mill decks as well, and was even a staple in the TCG for many years because of just how valuable, costless, chainable monster effect negation is, especially one that can be used twice. And at number 3, we have Abyss Dweller. This is a generic rank 4 monster with only 1700 attack that has the effect where on a quick effect, you can detach one of its materials in order to make it so your opponent can't activate any card effects in their graveyard this turn. So if your opponent had a Breakthrough Skill in their graveyard, it would be turned off with the Abyss Dweller's effect. And there's also a lot of other cards which have graveyard effects that are great to turn off, like how Blue Eyes decks kind of revolve around the White Stone of Ancients. So being able to turn off its effect for a turn can kind of win you the game against most of those decks. In fact, there's tons of decks that are completely stopped if their graveyard is turned off. And that's also why the field spell card Necro Valley is a very played ultra rare card as well, although not as played as the top 10 cards on this list, so I won't actually make this list. Abyss Dweller does have really low attack for being a generic rank 4 monster though, so its best use is if it has a water monster as one of its materials, because it has another effect where, if one of its attached materials is water, all of your water monsters gain 500 attack, which boosts it to a much more reasonable 2200 attack, but can also apply to all of your monsters if they happen to be water attribute. And because of this benefit for having a water monster as a material, dinosaur decks sometimes play Megalo Smasher X at 1 copy, just so they have a water attribute material for Abyss Dweller. However, Abyss Dweller, while being a good staple card in pretty much any deck that goes into rank 4 monsters, it definitely sees the most amount of play in Territory of the Shark decks, where if you remember from the Brionac section, this is a skill which allows you to change all of your water monsters to level 4 until the end of the turn, which is really good if it's comboed with Deep Sea Diva bringing out Atlantean Heavy Infantry, as both of these normally level 2 monsters will be converted into level 4 due to the skill. Then they can be used to go into Abyss Dweller, which turns Abyss Dweller's quick effect that shuts off the graveyard into a spell speed 2 destruction effect, because Atlantean Heavy Infantry has the effect where if it's sent to the graveyard to activate a water monster's effect, you can destroy one face-up card your opponent controls. So Abyss Dweller is already good on its own, good enough to see play in all kinds of competitive meta decks, but turning its quick effect into a quick effect destruction makes it even better. And that's why Territory of the Shark decks see lots of competitive success, although it doesn't need to use Atlantean Heavy Infantry to be good. That just kind of makes it bonkers. And at number 2, we have Book of Moon. This is a quick play spell card which has the effect to change one face-up monster in the field to face-down defense position. And it allows you to change any monster of the field defense position and not just your opponent's cards, like Paleozoic Canadia. Since it can be used during your turn and allows you to target your own monsters, it's a very good offensive and defensive card, which is why it's the second most played card in the game. You see, Book of Moon on its own doesn't seem very impressive, as you don't actually gain card advantage for changing a monster to defense position, so it's a straight -1 from your hand. However, Book of Moon is versatile as hell. You can use it to flip one of your opponent's indestructible boss monsters face down, so that you can destroy it with some other kind of card effect, or spin it later with Digital Blood Korbosh. You can use it during your opponent's turn to disrupt plays by flipping a monster face down so that it can't be used for a Synchro or XC summon, or it can be used during the battle phase in order to flip a monster face down to prevent an attack. And during your turn, it can be used on your own monsters in order to prevent them from being interacted with your opponent's disruptions. If you're trying to resolve the effect of something like Elemental Hero Stratos, and your opponent chains a breakthrough skill in response, trying to stop its effect from happening, you can then chain Book of Moon to the breakthrough skill, flipping your Stratos face down. That way the effect will still resolve and it dodges the effect of breakthrough skill's negate. Since breakthrough skill only negates the effect of a face-up monster, and not the activation of an effect itself. It's also really good against popular cards like Karma Cut, which can only banish face-up targets, so you can use Book of Moon to flip your own monster face down to save your monster from getting banished. It can also be used on your own monsters to reset their effects if they're under a negative effect, like maybe an opponent's World Legacy Clash that lowered its attack, or if you're just playing Gaia the Magical Knight of Dragons and have used its effect once. And there's very few cards in the game that are both useful as an offensive form of disruption tool, and defensive, keeping your monsters alive or allowing their effects to resolve tool. The closest we get is probably Forbidden Lance, which is also another very heavily played ultra rare staple card, which simply lowers the attack of a monster by 800 but makes it immune to spell and trap cards for the rest of the turn. The reason Book of Moon sees more play than Forbidden Lance is because the effect is just slightly more useful and more versatile in more situations. When you're playing at the highest levels, or just against a wide variety of decks, having one card that's good against pretty much all of them, and can be used in pretty much every deck since it doesn't have a cost, is just more valuable than more bombastic effects like maybe Drowning Mirror Force. Which is why Book of Moon also saw tons of competitive play in the TCG as well, and in fact it was limited for the TCG for most of its life. Generally, cards that saw tons of competitive play in the TCG as a staple also see tons of play in Duel Links if they come out, with only a few rare exceptions. And at number 1, we have Mystical Space Typhoon. This is a quick play spell card which simply has the effect to destroy one spell or trap card on the field. So for the same reasons Cosmic Cyclone was useful, being able to use it during your turn or during your opponent's turn in order to disrupt plays apply to Mystical Space Typhoon, except for the fact that it doesn't have a cost associated to it. And also, like I said in the Cosmic Cyclone section, a vast majority of spell or traps do not have floating effects. So just destroying the card is more than good enough against a vast majority of decks. So you don't actually need to banish the card, even if banishing the card is technically better. So Mystical Space Typhoon is pretty much played in every deck that doesn't need to adjust their life point value, or plays other limited 3 cards so they can't even use Cosmic Cyclone if they want it. And Mystical Space Typhoon is useful in pretty much every deck because there's lots of good spell or trap cards in the game, and pretty much every deck uses spell and trap cards, even decks that don't play any spell and traps like Super Heavy Samurais, since their equipped cards are treated as spell cards while they're on the field. And currently, as of making this video, there's an overpowered skill in the game called Clock of Destiny, which allows you to add a Clock Tower Prison field spell card from your deck to your hand, and also allows you to place 3 clock counters on the card, and then add a Mystical Space Typhoon from your deck to your hand, which is a pure +1 in card advantage from a skill, with the +1 in card advantage being one of the best generic cards in the game. And its obvious synergy is to be used to destroy Clock Tower Prison so they can activate its effect, which special summons a Destiny Hero monster that can be used to OTK your opponent. But even with the popularity of Clock Tower Prison decks, that's not why Mystical Space Typhoon is the most played staple card in the game, because pretty much every deck plays Mystical Space Typhoon. Even Gaia decks who use Archfiend Eccentric specifically because it's a monster spell and trap card removal will also play copies of Mystical Space Typhoon because they just need more ways to destroy spells and traps. And Mystical Space Typhoon is not on any of the ban lists currently, so you don't have to worry about playing it over other cards like you do with Cosmic Cyclone. It's just a costless way to destroy a spell or trap card during either player's turn, which is useful in pretty much every single deck. Alright, and that's the list. With this video I've gone over every single top 10 staple card from all the rarities and Duel Links. So go watch the past 3 videos if you want to see the other ones. And also, if you have any other Duel Links related ideas, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, even if Duel Links related videos don't perform as well as the TCG ones.